Just give me the facts.
Just the facts. Only the facts.
Breathe. Focus. Keep it simple.
No doubt. Okay, so I'm at this art museum with my cousin Ignacio, right? And there was this like abstract expressionism exhibit. But you know me, I'm more like a neo-cubist kind of guy, right? But there was this one Rothko that was sublime, bro. Oh my God.
Luis.
Okay, sorry. I just get excited and stuff. But anyway, and Ignacio tells me, yo, I met this crazy fine writer chick at the spot last night. Like, fine, like crazy stupid fine. And he goes up to the bartender and goes, look at the girl I'm with. You know what I'm saying? She's crazy stupid fine, right? The bartenders are all like, yeah, crazy stupid fine. So this writer chick tells Ignacio, yo, I'm like a boss in the world of guerrilla journalism, and I got mad connects with the peeps behind the curtains, you know what I'm saying? Ignacio's like, for real? And she's like, yeah. You know what? I can't tell you who my contact is because he works with the Avengers.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and this dude sounds like a badass, man. Like, he comes up to him and says, yo, I'm looking for this dude who's new on the scene, who's like flashing this fresh tack, who's got like bomb moves, right? Who you got? She's like, well, we got everything nowadays. We got a guy who jumps, we got a guy who swings, we got a guy who crawls up the walls. You gotta be more specific. And he's like, I'm looking for a guy that shrinks. And I'm like, damn, I got all nervous because I keep mad secrets for you, bro. So I asked Ignacio, is it the badass tell the stupefied writer chick to tell you, to tell me, because I'm tight with that man, that he's looking for him?
And? What'd he say?
He said yes.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming a new guest today, and that is Edward Thompson. Ed, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good.
Yeah. So, what I like to do with new guests is I like to have you guys tell people a little bit about yourself. So tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? All that fun stuff.
Okay, so let's see. I have been reviewing movies since 2010, just as a hobby, just as a way to kind of keep busy during times like, well, especially like during lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of stuff related to comic book movies and animation. And the other thing over lockdown is I started learning video editing, playing around with that, making a YouTube channel, and just kind of just seeing where that all goes.
Okay, and what do you write for any specific websites, or is it just kind of like your own blog type thing?
My own website, whywewatch.com, a dash between each word.
Okay, cool. And what's the video editing like? Tell me a little bit about what you do with video editing.
Yeah, so what I figured out, since I usually do movie reviews, is I did try to do like filming, like the YouTube reviews, but I'm not great on camera. What I figured out that I could do instead is just kind of re-edit movies, make like fake trailers usually. And sometimes along with that, sometimes fake posters.
Okay. So what kind of fake trailers have you made so far?
Let's see. Off the top of my head, well, I haven't made that many, but off the top of my head, I did, because they're usually like those ones where it's a style trailer where you take something and just use different trailers presentation. So
right.
I've done The Devil's Advocate in the style of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I've done 2 Hitman trailers, one for each of the remakes that actually try to be true to the actual games, like actually stealthy and all that stuff. One for Iron Man 3, trying to do something to one of the songs in it. And also a horror style one for Birds of Prey.
Okay, very cool. So is it just mainly the fake trailers? Have you done like any alternate versions of movies, like, stuff like there's like alternate cuts of like Superman 2. There have been alternate cuts of Iron Man 3 is another one, and a lot of fan edits and that kind of stuff. Have you done any big scale projects like that, or no?
But way too advanced for me because of how much you have to do audio editing, which I do not have the training in. Well, actually, I don't have the training in just about any of it, but especially
okay, cool. And how long have you been doing the YouTube channel so far now?
Let's see, the YouTube channel started a little bit before lockdown, so 2019. Also I did a Spider-Man trailer.
Okay, cool.
I did The Amazing Spider-Man in the style of Homecoming. That's actually the first one I did.
Oh, okay, nice. So yeah, so you've been doing it for about a little over 2 years then, I guess.
Two-ish, very, very, very on and off.
Right.
A couple of fake commercials too, just like kind of whatever I can come up with.
Okay, cool. And is that also why we watch on YouTube? So that if anybody wants to look you up?
I believe so.
Okay.
I'll probably email you a bunch of that stuff.
Okay, yeah, we'll have the correct links for all that stuff in the show notes then. But today, the movie you wanted to talk about today was Ant-Man from 2015, directed by Peyton Reed, starring, of course, Paul Rudd as Scott Lang and Evangeline Lilly as Hope Van Dyne, Corey Stoll as Darren Cross, Yellow Jacket, Michael Douglas as Hank Pym, and I think probably everyone's favorite character, Michael Pena, as Luis, and also cameo from Anthony Mackie as Sam Wilson as the Falcon. So before we jump into the movie, and I know you've read some of the comics before, we talked about the Nick Spencer run, but were you very familiar with comics before the MCU? What was kind of like your gateway into superheroes and comics and all that stuff?
Yeah, so my gateway was definitely a little bit of the movies as a kid. Like the early Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, some X-Men, but mainly those. Then what really kicked things off was the MCU itself, The Dark Knight. And then it was Comic Book Club at New Pulse, which really got me going, got me to really like read the books like quite a bit. And that's really where it started.
What's that Comic Book Club you said?
Yeah, Comic Books United at New Pulse.
What's that? Is that a podcast? That a community?
Oh no, that's well, yeah, it's my college's comic book, club.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. Yeah, I just wanted to see what we were talking about there. Okay. So what were kind of the comics that you first got into then? Was it just like MCU type stuff that related to like Iron Man and the Avengers or Spider-Man and all that kind of stuff? Or what was your first like comic reading experience like?
Yeah, it was definitely anything on both Marvel and DC side related to movies, just any, characters I was really familiar with. And then from there, it's like slowly expanded. It was, a little bit of like, let's see, Spider-Woman here and there, Miss Marvel here and there, like, years ago. I actually haven't started the show yet.
Was that the Carol Danvers Ms. Marvel or the Kamala Khan one?
Kamala.
Oh, okay, yeah. Just wanted to make sure what time frame we're talking, because I think Carol Danvers was still Ms. Marvel around the time the movies, the MCU movies started. I think that was like right around the time when she was right before she made the switch. I think it was like around 2010 was when she finally made the switch over to Captain Marvel.
Yeah, that sounds right. And then because my reading, this would have been around 2014 when I really like started reading stuff.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right for Kamala then. Okay. And so, like I said, we're talking about Ant-Man today. Did you have much familiarity with Ant-Man before this movie came out?
No, I probably started reading the Nick Spencer run almost definitely absolutely after the movie came out.
Yeah. The run came out after the movie, I believe. I think that was one of the impetuses, because I think when the movie actually came out, Scott Lang was still dead in the comics. So then once the movie became popular, then they decided to bring him back in the comics and bring him back as Ant-Man. But my familiarity, well, of course, I remember, reading stories with Hank Pym as the original Ant-Man, but I'd always found Scott Lang to be a really interesting character when he popped up in different times throughout my comic reading. He wasn't an Avenger proper for a long time. He was just kind of like on the edges. We had done recently an episode for my Patreon show where we talked about the Avengers Under Siege story arc. He appears in that. He appeared in a really great issue with Hawkeye where if you remember the scene in Civil War where Hawkeye shoots an arrow with Ant-Man on it, that comes from this old Avengers issue. And that was Scott Lang in that issue too. And he was a member of like Heroes for Hire. He was a member of Fantastic Four, and I think it was during Jeff Johns' run in the early 2000s. That's when he joined the Avengers team fairly briefly before he ended up getting killed off. But yeah, I always found him to be a really cool character. So when they said they were going to do an Ant-Man movie, I was kind of surprised to find out that they were going to go with the Scott Lang version instead of Hank Pym or Eric O'Grady, who was Ant-Man in the comics at the time. So I was really pleased that they had kept him and that they'd found a way to work Hank into it as well.
Yeah. And let me think, coming off of that. Yeah, I'm actually really glad they went with Scott too. They went with the cast they did. And I mean, the big thing with why they probably went with Scott is because of the controversies surrounding Pym, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, so that's something that's been largely blown out of proportion, I think, just over the years. I mean, it's not defending it or anything like that, but but it was he had so for anyone who doesn't know, there was a famous issue of the Avengers when Hank was having a nervous breakdown and Jan was talking to him, and he like kind of reacts and he gets angry and he reacts and he accidentally smacks her. Like it wasn't in it, but it's been played up in the years since that he was beating her like continuously when that wasn't really what had happened. But he had gone to prison, not because of that, obviously, but because of other reasons. And he had, he'd reformed and made amends to that. But it became such a key part of his character in the consciousness, and it so much so that when Mark Millar did the Ultimates, he went full on and made Hank a spousal abuser, which was just disgusting depiction of it. And I understand why they wanted to avoid Hank Pym for that reason, but I think they'd found I'm glad they didn't avoid him completely, and I'm glad that they'd found a way to just completely ignore that aspect of him.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And because I read it was like an editorial problem with how it was drawn, how it was depicted, and all that stuff. So it was one of those things. Again, not defending the action, but just how it happened initially.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't and then supposed to be like that. It just ended up being
and then how they had to run with it. Which was probably once it was drawn, the best thing I could do.
Yeah, it was a really weird time. There's a whole story, if anyone's interested in it. You just look up history of Hank Pym, and I think it was Jim Shooter was the writer or the editor at the time, and there'd been a lot of miscommunication at the time, and the artist had drawn it a certain way, and then I think they were on deadline, like you were saying, and they just had to kind of stick with it, type of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a messy time in the Avengers comics, and but yeah, bringing in Scott Lang was definitely a good choice. And I like that they had worked Hank into, because this is one of the first movies that kind of establishes a bigger superhero universe before Iron Man, but after Captain America. So because when we first were presented with the MCU, we basically kind of had this idea that, well, we had Iron Man, we had Captain America in World War II, and then we had decades of nothing, and then all of a sudden in 2008 we've got Iron Man. But what I like that this movie did is it kind of filled in some of those gaps. Like, no, there were other superheroes before Iron Man in that time period.
Yeah, and they did that really well with first on a technical level with the de-aging of Michael Douglas and all that.
Yeah, the de-aging of Michael Douglas, the aging up of oh crap, the actress who plays Peggy Carter. I'm blanking on her name.
Haley Atwell.
Haley Atwell. Thank you. I hate when that happens.
Wait, was that makeup or was that also visual?
That was also I believe that was also CGI. That was so they aged her up, not as extreme as they did in Winter Soldier, obviously, but they did age her up a little bit in that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Michael Douglas, they base his appearance in that scene because it takes place in 1989. So they based it on how he looked in Wall Street. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually did a paper on Wall Street.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
Yeah, and how it created a bunch of stockbrokers, which was not intended.
Yeah, it was talk about people completely missing the point of that movie.
Yeah.
And so some other things they did in this. This is also one of the first MCU movies, one of the really first MCU movies that I think really leaned into the idea of superhero, not so much as a genre in and of itself, but as kind of a trope you put on other genres. So in that case, in this case, it was the whole conceit of this is it's basically a heist movie, but it's got superhero elements worked into it. And I thought that was a really clever thing to do and a really good way to make use of Scott's background and to kind of set the movie apart from the other MCU stuff. Because if you're going with Hank Pym and he's developing this technology, he's got this suit, then he has his own company, he's got dealings with SHIELD, you can very easily run into the problem of him being kind of like a second-rate Iron Man. And I think by going with Scott and going with the heist angle, that was another reason why they had chosen Scott instead, because it really allowed them to find a way to do something that the MCU hadn't really seen before.
Yeah. Although also Winter Soldier has a similar thing where it was very much, what do they call it? The 70s spy thriller.
Right. Yeah, that's true. There were other movies that did it before. I think by the time Ant-Man came around, though, I think this is when at least in my mind, this is when it really kind of cemented what Marvel was doing with their movies. And it's like, oh, okay, they're taking these concepts, but they're putting them on other type of genre films.
Okay, yeah, solidifying it.
Yeah. And and it's a movie that it had some it took a while to get off the ground. I think you had mentioned that you had some knowledge of what happened behind the scenes with Edgar Wright and all that.
Yeah, I didn't want to read too much into it because I wanted to keep some stuff just didn't want to overwhelm myself with what was going on behind the scenes. But there was what do you know about what happened with Edgar Wright and his initial?
So I understand that Edgar Wright had this pitch. It was going to involve and it was supposed to come out a while ago. Like they were developing it back around the time of the first Iron Man movie, and it was even announced at 2011 Comic-Con, and they had I think they had talked about how they were going to be using all three. I think they were going to be using all three Ant-Man, but I wasn't exactly sure 100%.
I don't know about that, but it does line up with like one piece of something I heard where they did want like whoever Ant-Man was, maybe it was Scott, maybe it was Eric, to very much be like just like unlikable, like more unlikable than just simply a burglar.
Right. So that was probably Eric then, because he was the Ant-Man at the time in the comics. Unless they were trying to merge aspects of Eric and Scott's character together. But the movie, it had taken a while. And I think because I'm not sure 100%, but I believe that when they were originally starting to develop it, the hope was that they would have an Ant-Man movie to kind of be a companion with all these other pre-Avengers movies like Thor, Captain America, Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, so that they would be able to work Ant-Man into the Avengers as well. That obviously didn't end up happening, and this movie didn't come out until after Age of Ultron.
Which is a real shame, because I wish Hank had been part of Ultron.
Yeah, there was, and I think there was, I had mentioned this before way back when we talked about Age of Ultron on the show, but there was some description I had read before Age of Ultron came out that said that Ultron, the idea for Ultron, it came from like this old Defense Department proposal project or something that Tony had found and he dusted off. And then when they said that, Michael Douglas was going to be playing an older Hank Pym who had worked with SHIELD and all that, my thought was, oh, that's how they're going to connect it. Hank Pym had done this Ultron proposal, and that was either rejected or buried for whatever reason, or maybe it wasn't feasible at the time. And then in the Age of Ultron movie, Tony finds it, he dusts it off. And there's even a slight brief mention of it in Age of Ultron, because when they're first talking about it, Tony says, I think this could be the key to creating Ultron. And then Bruce says, well, I thought Ultron was just a fantasy, right? There was no lead up to that at all. And there's no explanation further about what. So I think that was something that was maybe left over from a previous script or something, but
or just cut because that movie was kind of chopped to hell.
Right. Or just cut out because there were a lot of issues behind the scenes with that. And so, yeah, I was also a little bit disappointed with that they didn't find some way to work Hank Pym into Ultron's creation, because even if you don't have him directly involved with the creation of Ultron, there's still a lot of ways that you can have some connection to him involved in it.
Yeah. And my thing is, I think it would be better to not put it all on Tony. Because that just kind of, I think the blame should have been shared. That would have helped with his continued character development and his kind of evolution, de-evolution, just that cycle he was going through his entire, all of it.
It also would have helped to tie Hank in a little bit more closely with his animosity towards the Starks, because he's got a lot of animosity towards the Starks in this movie. And Scott says a famous line in Civil War, Hank Pym always said, never trust a Stark, and all that kind of stuff. So I think if you had some connection with Ultron as well in there, and maybe Hank decided that Ultron was too dangerous or something, and that's why he buried it. And then Tony kind of resurrected it. So I think there's a lot of stuff you could have done that could have tied them a little bit more closely together.
Yeah, especially since they were one movie apart, 1 to 3 months apart. All that.
Yeah. Right, and they're so closely tied in another way with Scott going into the Avengers compound and meeting up with Falcon, who's just recently joined the Avengers at the end of Age of Ultron too.
As well.
So I'm not sure exactly 100% what happened with Edgar Wright, but there's in 2014 they jointly announced that there were differences in their vision of the film. And Wright said, I wanted to make a Marvel movie, but I don't think they really wanted to make an Edgar Wright movie. And also they wanted to have a little bit more control over the writing process, where Wright is very heavily involved in the writing of all the movies that he does. So, and he said, suddenly becoming a director for hire on it, you're sort of less emotionally invested and you start to wonder why you're there recently. And surprisingly, Adam McKay was also involved in talks to possibly take over at one point too, which would have been really interesting, especially in light of the films he's done more recently, like The Big Short and Vice, and now Don't Look Up.
Yeah, I forget. Even though I just saw it, did he have a final story or writing credit or anything on this?
I'm not sure. I think he probably has some, maybe some writing credit because he was involved in so many drafts of it. So just based on writers WGA rules and all that, I think he might have a credit, but I'm not sure how much of his writing actually made it into the final product.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was mostly some kind of overhaul, because from what I read so far, it was the speculation on how far they want to take Scott or maybe Eric.
Yeah, so the writing credits, we've got Edgar Wright, Joe Cornish, Adam McKay, and Paul Rudd. So I think, and the story was by Edgar Wright and Joe Cornish. So I think they probably had done they probably used a lot of the basics that Wright had used, and then they just, changed a lot of stuff. Yeah, with Paul Rudd probably doing a lot of rewriting on it. And McKay also reworked parts of the script as well, it says here. And looks like Peyton Reed also had, pretty big input on the script as well once he finally came in. And McKay had done a lot of his writing, it looks like, with Paul Rudd. And McKay said that Rudd was really great with dialogue, which explains a lot of the dialogue that ends up in this movie, because the dialogue is just, it's probably next to James Gunn's movies. I think the dialogue in Ant-Man is probably some of the best in the whole MCU.
That makes sense. Also with, obviously very improv heavy, or at least most likely.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, the whole Edgar Wright thing, I know a lot of people at the time were really kind of annoyed with Marvel at that. I think I'm of two minds of it myself. On the one hand, I think about Shane Black on Iron Man 3 and how it became much more of a Shane Black movie and much less of an Iron Man movie in the end. And I think if Edgar Wright had stayed on, I wonder if it would have been more of a Edgar Wright movie and less of an Ant-Man movie, if that might have been the end result. I'm not sure. Do you have any ideas, any thoughts on that?
I think it would have been. I think it would have been pretty well split if he had been able to stay on for the most part. And 'cause what it is the other thing is, I guess he didn't want to have it, tied in as little as possible. He really wanted a standalone feature, it seems.
Yeah, which is
Because,
also, if you're playing in the MCU sandbox, you kind of have to play in,
Yeah.
you have to play in the sandbox. So
yeah, and he started work like pre MCU, so he had to really
Right.
kind of get dropped into all of this.
yeah, that's a good point. And in fact, even in 2000, I found this out while I'm looking at this. Howard Stern was actually in talks with Marvel at one point to purchase the film rights, which would have been thank God that didn't happen, because I don't know how that would have ended up.
Probably not great.
Yeah. So what do you think of the cast in this movie? What are some of the standouts, do you think?
I think, well, obviously when we mentioned Rudd and Douglas. I think the standout for me is actually Corey Stoll, Yellow Jacket.
Yeah, he was another interesting choice when they said that Yellow Jacket was going to be the film's villain, because they had Yellow Jacket in the comics is obviously just another one of Hank Pym's identities, but that was the identity when he had, quote unquote, abused his wife. That was when he'd had his mental breakdown. So he had always associated that with a very dark time in his life, although he eventually came around to it and kind of reconciled the two. And Corey Stoll, Darren Cross was more of a Scott Lang villain, although he wasn't a costume supervillain, although his cousin ends up becoming a villain as a costume supervillain. So they had, I thought it was a really clever way to work in the Yellow Jacket idea and to tie it into the movie and kind of combine it with this villain from Scott Lang's past in the comics.
Yeah. And I think because they definitely run the risk of doing, and I think you mentioned this, the idea of like a copycat villain, like an Ironmonger, let's see, a Killmonger type of thing. And I think they did the best they could with avoiding that with him, at least in every way possible. Or maybe not. Well, at least Corey Stoll's performance, I think, elevates it past that.
Right. I think having him be a foil to Hank, who initially comes on as Hank's protege, and then he eventually, turns against him. I thought that was another way that it kind of helped to. It was kind of an inversion of the Tony Stane relationship in that way, because Stane was kind of more the mentor role and Tony was more the protege role. So they kind of flipped that in this one instead.
And it looks like so much of Stoll's motivation is just that validation from Hank, which I thought was really interesting.
I thought that was.
There's the.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Plus, there's how the particles are affecting him, with him, going the route of Hank in the comics to a certain extent. All that.
Right. I never really realized that until you just said that now, but I just picked up on it. That point when Scott asks Hank why he doesn't just wear the suit himself, and Hank says that the suit takes a toll on you, and so I think that was kind of a hint to kind of like the psychological problems that Hank had in the comics.
Yeah, that's a weird thing, how, because they haven't really addressed it since. Is Scott going to have to deal with that at some point?
Yeah, I'm wondering if well, I mean, we do have another movie coming out soon. We've got Quantum Mania coming out, I think next year, if I'm not mistaken.
Sounds right.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting if they play with that at all. What did you think of Evangeline Lilly as Hope? Because I thought this was an interesting way to work in the Wasp aspect, where you had Hank and Jan as the precursors, and then they created this new character, Hope, for the movie.
Yeah, I like her. Actually, I liked her more in this one than the next one.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought she was really good. I liked the training stuff. Like that was definitely the best thing they could do with Hank, is creating Hope, reworking everything with him. So yeah, so just to start, but that was all really well done.
Yeah, I thought it was a good way to work in the Wasp aspect, because, you know, Jan is such a big part of the Avengers in the comics, which Hope hasn't gotten into that point yet. But and now that Evangeline Lilly has some anti-vax stuff going on, who knows if she actually will be? But
probably. Letitia Wright, I think, is still working on Black Panther.
Yeah, so far. I mean, but
similar.
Yeah, we'll see how things shake out with that. But whatever the case, I thought she was really good in this movie, and I love the post-credit stinger when we see her, when Hank shows her the new Wasp outfit, and I love when they announced that the next one will be Ant-Man and the Wasp. So I loved all that. I know a lot of people don't like the sequel. I enjoyed it. It definitely isn't as good as this one, though. I definitely would say that.
Yeah, I just have a weird thing with it, where it's just kind of like, because of how they have to tie it into Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Like my main thing with it, I remember I wrote, was they're just so mean to Scott.
Yeah, that was I mean, at some point I understood it to a certain extent, but I think they kind of leaned in a little bit too heavy to that.
Yeah.
Although I will say, one of the things I liked in this movie is Scott's acknowledgement that he kind of knows why he's actually here, right? So when he tells Hope, you know, when Hope's all upset about that she doesn't get to wear the suit, and Scott tells her, don't you realize why they got me? It's because I'm expendable and you're not. And I kind of like that he knows that and he acknowledges that, as opposed to it being kind of like something that Hank is trying to hide from him in some way, or Hank is trying to pretty it up. And it's like they're both clear on what this relationship is, where they stand, why Scott's here. And I thought that was it was a really nice touch to the movie.
It was, and I guess like Hank really kind of balances it out with being pretty no, nurturing isn't the right word. Michael Douglas isn't nurturing.
No, definitely not.
Get the idea.
No, but I liked him in it. Michael Douglas, when they said that he was cast as Hank Pym, it was one of those picks that I wasn't really sure what to make of it. Although it, you know, now having see how it worked out, I think I can't think of anyone who would have been able to do a better job in that role.
Yeah, I thought it was good too. Rudd, when I initially heard about that, it was, and how much of a comedy that was, my like, this is kind of like my weird turning point with the MCU, where it starts to feel it goes a little up and down. Like on paper, it's like they're really going for, like, kind of, my initial kind of thing with this movie is it feels like it's very, like, safe on paper.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Paul Rudd in a comedy.
Yeah, and that I like the casting idea of Paul Rudd. When I heard it, I thought he'd make a good choice, because Scott has always been a little bit more laid back than Hank in the comics. So I thought that was a nice choice. And then you're right, on paper it seemed like they would be leaning a lot more heavily into the comedy aspect. I mean, they had an actor famous for comedies in it. They had a director who'd also mostly done comedies, but I was really surprised at how well Rudd did in the dramatic aspects of it. And, you know, he's come out and doing some other things since that. He's got to stretch his dramatic muscles a little bit more, and it's been really, really fun to watch that.
don't think I've seen any of those. Do you have any
There
recommendations?
was it was I think it was a Netflix TV show he did where it was like a cloning type thing. It was I can't remember
Oh,
the
okay,
name
I
of
heard
it.
of that one.
Living with Yourself, I think it was called. That was really good.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, I think that's what it was called. But yeah, he was great in that. And I love the relationship with his family in it. I thought
Mhm.
you've got his ex-wife, played amazingly by Judy Greer, but also you've got Bobby Cannavale playing the stepfather, Paxton, and I thought that was another. I really liked what they did with Paxton because at the beginning they it seems like they're going the route, the stereotypical route of the new husband's an asshole type of thing, and he's just going to give the hero a tough time, and both the ex-wife and the stepfather are going to kind of conspire to make things to poison Scott's relationship with his daughter, and they don't do that, and I was really
Yeah.
happy that they didn't go that route. And I especially at the end when we see that Paxton is he's really him and Scott have friction, but at the end of the day he really does care about Cassie, and he does to a certain extent he cares about Scott as well, and I thought that was I like that they had a really mature take on that kind of family dynamic.
And they continue that to the second one. Oh, that is the one thing I noted is like it is all in good faith, although I do think it does take uh, Paxton a little bit of time to warm up to Scott. I think there is a little bit of probably just better if he's in prison for Cassie, for the family, like good
Yeah.
faith, but looking out.
Right. But I like that they give him a good faith motivation for it, right? It's not just, he's not
Yeah.
doing this just because I don't want you near my family type of thing. He's doing it because he's like, I really, and you understand that too, with him being a cop, there's a certain amount of institutionalization mindset that kind of sets in. So, ex-con cop, there's obviously going to be, and I think that they show the growth that he has over the movie, I think is handled really well.
Yeah. And movie in general is pretty good. I mean, they don't go into it too much, but it's good with the like the depiction of prison, rehabilitation type stuff,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually one of my weird things when I was watching it, taking notes that the one person who doesn't get redeemed, who I think could have gotten some form of minor redemption, was actually Cross.
Okay. Why do you say that?
I just think because I saw that his motivation wasn't really the money. So much of it was like the validation from Hank.
Mm-hmm.
So much of it was mental illness. And then the way he goes out is just especially gruesome.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, there was some opportunities there. But also you mentioned the aspects of prison and rehabilitation. And that's a good point too. The movie does show that, in our society, rehabilitating yourself is not that easy. Like the system does it does all it can to make it as hard as possible to encourage you to go back to crime. And I thought that was, I mean, like he gets fired from Baskin Robbins because he is an ex-con. I thought
because of like corporate policy, not even the manager really wanted to do it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the manager's like, and the kicker is like he's not like a violent criminal, right? He had done this crime, which was, I mean, not victimless, but the victims were criminals to begin with. So it's not that, and it really shows like the lack of understanding in the criminal justice system, the lack of accountability for people who are the rich criminals and all that kind of stuff, and how the system is just so set up to make things like once you get a prison sentence, if whether it's a violent crime or a non-violent crime, like once you get out of prison, once you've done your time, you're still doing your time. We don't let you really go through a rehabilitation. And I like that the movie touched on that in some ways.
Yeah. And then like it's weird because and this isn't something the movie goes into at all, but it's a victimless crime that becomes full of victims when the company that feels wronged or like loses profits just charges their consumers, lays off a bunch of people, all that kind of crap.
Yeah, yeah. And then, they break up a family. They condemn this guy for life to low wage jobs or no jobs. And basically, he only, and that's the thing, like he only goes back to crime because he's got no other choice, because he can't even get a minimum wage job. And I thought, yeah, there's so much in there in that movie. And I think that's not really the point of the movie, but I like that they had worked that stuff in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the supporting cast of like his crew. So we have Luis, obviously, Michael Pena, but we've also got David Dastmalchian as Kurt, and T.I. Harris as Dave. What did you think of those guys?
I thought they were great. What I was surprised by, because I looked at some behind the scenes stuff, is that wasn't David's natural accent.
Yeah, I was surprised at that too. Because he's one of those guys who's been in so many different things, and I didn't realize it until I had seen him in the Suicide Squad. And then I looked him up and what other stuff he's been in. Find out, he had been in The Dark Knight, he had been in Ant-Man, he had been in what was the other one? He was on he was part of the Flash TV show too, even.
Oh, nice. Yeah, thought it was good, and still like the movie luckily keeps like a very, like tight cast for the most part, which is great because now that's been expanding rapidly too across all this stuff.
Right. And yeah, and I liked how they worked in integrating the crew with Hank Pym and Hope. I thought that was it shows that Scott's trying to bring something to this, and he's trying to make it kind of his own. It shows him taking some more initiative and kind of standing up a little bit, and I like that as well.
Yeah, and gives Hank more redemption to give.
Right. I also like that we see the fight with Falcon is great because, and this kind of goes to the training montage as well, because one of the issues in a lot of superhero movies up until the MCU, and even some of the MCU movies are guilty of this too, is that once the character puts on the costume, it's like they magically know how to do all this stuff. And I like that we see Scott going through the training of it. And I like that when he goes up against an Avenger, right, he's doing things like he's revealing his identity. He's, and I thought that was all really well done.
Yeah, it was a really good fight scene. Trying to think, because this is something that we've been dealing with more lately, is fight scenes that cut a lot, feel really like just really sloppily edited, all that stuff. And this one seemed, had some quick edits, but it was for the most part really solid.
One of the things too, I thought they did a good job was showcasing just how, because when you think about the idea of someone being able to shrink down to size, it doesn't sound like an impressive superpower on paper. And the movie does a really good job of showing you just how dangerous someone with that power can actually be.
Yeah, true. They explain it really well. Like, I think Hope said the force of a bullet in that punch.
Right. Yeah, because when you the whole idea of when you shrink down, you still have all the density and all that. It's just in a much more condensed package. So it does make sense. I'm not sure scientifically if it makes sense, but for the average viewer, you can logically connect those things together.
And the other stuff is they make it in a couple like small scenes. They really do like make it a spectacle as well.
Yeah,
it would be the initial flight from the prison, the fly through of Pimtech, a couple of fly throughs of Pimtech, stuff like that.
Well, also the using the ants to such great effect too. That was something I was not expecting them to bring in from the comics. I figured that was the whole idea of of Ant-Man being able to control ants that seemed almost ludicrous. It seemed almost too ridiculous for something that they could make work in a live action movie. And I thought they did a really good job with it. What did you think of that?
One detail I noticed that was nice was it was like different ant farms for each of the kinds of ants that he was working with. So yeah, I thought that stuff was really well done. Trying to think. Yeah. I guess maybe there could have been a little more. We really only see one group at a time, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And it's just those three groups, really. You got the flying ants, you got the carpenter ants, and you've got the electricity generating ones.
2, 3. There might be one more, but I think it might be similar to the first group.
I think so, yeah. But they've worked them in really well, and even so much that you have Anthony, right? When he dies at the end, I thought that was. I remember there were so many memes going around after the movie came out about like R.I.P. Anthony.
Yeah, they made us care. They successfully made us care.
That's the thing. I mean, they made people care about a flying ant, CGI generated flying ant. I thought that was great. And if anything, I think my one disappointment is that it seems like the ant aspect of it has kind of been left behind in the other movies, because we haven't seen it at all happen in any of the team up movies he's been in, and I can't really remember any big instances of it in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Can you?
Let me think. There was that one scene where they kept getting picked off by a bird.
Right.
When he was trying to call one. Them being used for to keep his ankle monitor on.
Yeah, that's true.
Those are the ones that it might just be those.
So that's pretty much it. And then they haven't appeared in any of the, like in Civil War and Infinity War and Endgame, they didn't have any of that in there. So if anything, I think when you're in an ensemble movie, it's kind of tough to give showcase to all those different things. But I think it was a little disappointing that they'd used the ants to such great effect in this movie, and they haven't really done it in successive films.
Yeah, and they could have. I'm trying to think, because they show Cross's tech getting ripped apart by them, which could have worked on Tony,
right?
Rhodey, a few people, actually, now that I think about it.
Right, or even just like, simple reconnaissance, or even just like having him, transportation wise, like having him fly around on ants. We haven't seen any of that in the other movies.
Yeah, it's surprising, I think about it.
But one of the things I do like about Paul Rudd in this role too is just how starstruck he gets around the other Avengers, and that's been like a consistent theme throughout all these movies he's been in. Like, first with Falcon in this movie, and then in Civil War, where he's just babbling the first time he meets Captain America, and then in Endgame too, right? It's this great use of showcasing that Scott really feels out of his depth when he's around all these other characters.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things I'm looking forward to with like all the Miss Marvel stuff.
Yeah, same here.
Is Kamala going crazy?
Yeah, I've only seen the first episode so far, but man, she was so great in that first episode. And I've seen like some of the interviews that actress has done, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how she works with the other actors in the series.
Yeah, she's a super fan. She's a driver nuts.
Yeah, that's what I love about it. I saw the one that she did where she was trying to name all the Marvel movies in like 1 minute, and then she couldn't remember Captain Marvel and Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, I think the Guardians might have been 2 of them too.
The Guardians, yeah, she also forgot those too. But yeah, anyway, back to this movie. Are there any other big things you wanted to note? I did think one of the things I just thought of now is I like tying it into the universe a little bit more. So they have like the Hydra stuff in there. I like the Shield stuff at the beginning. This movie does a really good job of tying itself to the MCU without making it feel, because I think that was some of the criticism of like Iron Man 2, was it felt like they were devoting too much time to building up the rest of the MCU. Same thing with Age of Ultron. It was all about like, setting all these other pieces in motion. Right. I did not get that sense with this movie. I think they struck a right balance between connecting it to the MCU, making it feel like it's part of the MCU, without making it feel like it's just a staging area for a future film.
Yeah, this is definitely very much like a standalone. I did think of one place where they could have added some more. It would have been nice right after that that 1989 sequence, if we could have seen kind of the advancements of everything like Shield and Hank and all of them have been working on. I think that would have been a good like credits montage.
Yeah, showing like, you know, the comparison of where they're going. That would have been nice too. And also kind of seeing, you know, there's that guy who's working for Hydra.
Who's still out there?
Yeah, he's still out there. But also I think it would have been, I understand it's because of what happened in Winter Soldier. Like, obviously he was one of the Hydra moles and all that. But I think having at least one more scene in there, I think would have been good to kind of have a callback to Winter Soldier to kind of remind people that, oh yeah, Hydra was still festering within Shield at that point. Yeah.
That's the one thing I read. There was the like tie-in comic they did. They showed it wasn't on Bucky, but it was Bucky's brainwashing, or some brainwashing. So there is a tie-in somewhere.
Okay, what was it that involved Bucky?
Well, it was Hank. Hank's first mission basically was like infiltrating some Hydra thing in Berlin, as far as the MCU is concerned.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would have liked to see a little bit more of Hank and Jan's time with Shield. I found myself really interested in that period where you've got this, and it really leaves the door open for some interesting movies if they ever, or a TV show or something if they get into it, with like, you know, some Cold War superhero stuff that they could play around with. And I'm hoping we get some of that at some point, because I think there's a lot of interesting things you could do there with, you know, you have Ant-Man and the Wasp, and it makes you wonder what other things was Shield up to, because, you know, if they have it makes me think that this probably wasn't the only superhero that they were trying to bring out, because we had also gotten, you know, we had seen now, because of Falcon and Winter Soldier, we found out about Isaiah Bradley after World War II. He had been like kind of a super soldier type. It seems like he was involved in Shield at some point or in some fashion or something like that. So, and then we get Captain Marvel, and then we get Ant-Man and the Wasp, and it makes me think like there's probably some other stuff that was going on that we haven't seen yet, and I would really like to touch on some of those aspects. See like some period pieces, like a 60s Cold War thriller set in the MCU would be really cool.
Oh, that would be nice. I think the best chance, depending on how they bring in some of the old Fox stuff, that could probably be set in probably one of those periods.
Yeah, I know they've been talking about, there's been a lot of fan speculation and like fan wishes that they would set the Fantastic Four in the 1960s. I feel like Fantastic Four, though, I think is a little bit too big to have it set and like make it a secret thing in the past, whereas something like Ant-Man and the Wasp, it's a much easier to kind of work into the fabric of the past. And because when they tried that with Captain Marvel, right, the first thing they had to do was they had to figure out a way to get her off of the planet for the next 20 years.
It's true.
Yeah.
And there's no issue with that. Maybe if they can work in, they probably don't want to do too much time travel, but obviously we're going to get something like that in Ant-Man 3.
Right. There could be something with time travel. But even like, you know, if we get like a Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., you know, series or something like that. But some more stuff I think would be really interesting. There are a lot of characters. I'm having trouble thinking off the top of my head, but there are a lot of different, you know, spy type Marvel characters that could easily be used in those types of contexts.
Yeah. We're getting, I can't remember if this was a confirmed or just one of those crazy sites, Thunderbolts.
Yeah, it's rumored, and it's not, I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but some of the sites that have been talking about the rumor are usually more legit, so I think it is in the works, and I think Hey guys, Perry here. I just wanted to jump in with a quick correction, or not so much correction, but more clarification. So, I've been recording a lot of these episodes way in advance because I've had a lot of requests for people to come on the show. So, even though you're listening to this episode now in August 29th at the earliest, we actually recorded this back in June. So at that time, there had been no confirmation about the Thunderbolts movie yet. Obviously, now that has been confirmed. So just wanted to quickly drop in with that note, just so you know, I'm not completely out of touch. I do want to keep up with the news and stuff like that. But anyway, sorry, just wanted to drop that note in there, and now back to the episode. We've kind of seen hints of it in the MCU already with Val being involved with US Agent and Yelena, and now we have Baron Zemo back in custody. So I think and we even saw in Shang-Chi, Abomination was in custody there, because we see after Wong fights him, he opens up a portal, and if you look closely, it looks like he's leading him back into like a cell block area.
Yeah. Oh, and he's gonna be in She-Hulk.
Right, he's going to be in She-Hulk as well. So yeah, I think Thunderbolts is definitely coming. I think it's you'll probably have Zemo involved, U.S. Agent, Yelena, and Abomination. I think are definite to be involved in some way.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. I'm looking forward to seeing that. And it looks like my guess is they probably lean in more towards the post Civil War Dark Reign era of the Thunderbolts, which was a really fun era when there was more kind of like a Suicide Squad take. And I think that would work much better for the MCU. I think the whole idea of villains redeeming themselves angle, which, while I love that in the comic books, I don't think they've got enough villains to be redeemed to really make up a team that would logically make sense.
Yeah. And just treading that, marketing it, even for Marvel, would be dicey.
Right. Yeah. Were there any other things you wanted to talk about with Ant-Man? I think those are the main points I wanted to hit on.
Let me see. Let me check my notes. I guess the main thing was kind of my thing I was saying about how it like initially like kind of felt like a safe movie, how it felt like this was the start of MCU kind of going up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Would like to get your thoughts on that, because now things are definitely like very, you never know what you're going to get with the MCU.
Yeah, I mean,
with a baseline, but
right. I think this movie did a really good job of, like you said, kind of setting itself apart, and it's like, I was looking forward to it. I look forward to all the Marvel movies, so that was, but it wasn't one I was excited about when I saw the trailers in the same way that I was excited about, say Guardians of the Galaxy, which is another property that I wasn't really super familiar with in the comics. But I known enough about it. It was kind of the same thing with Ant-Man. Like, I'd known decent enough about him, but I wasn't expecting it to be honest, when it came out, I thought it felt like it was a little bit late to do Ant-Man, because it felt like, we'd already done the Avengers, we'd already done all the build up to them, and it felt like they had I was worried that they had missed the boat on Ant-Man, and this probably wouldn't have, and this was trying to play catch up, but I ended up being really impressed with what they did with it overall.
Yeah. Well, it does also make sense to go back to basics. I mean, that's what they did with Iron Man 3 post Avengers. So, after Age of Ultron, back to basics again.
Yeah, that's a good point. Although I didn't like Iron Man 3 that much, so that's not the best example for my taste. But I get your point, and it is a nice way to show that they can. I think if that's the one lesson I would take from Ant-Man, is it shows that you can go back to basics, right? Not everything does have to be an escalation, and I think that's probably the best thing that it's done.
Yeah, and like I think that's maybe where Far From Home gets dicey, because it doesn't go as much back to basics as it could have.
Yeah, I think Far From Home, it got a little bit, it went a little bit too big towards the end, I thought, and but now it looks like we're going very back to basics at the end of No Way Home. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think I really wish that's another good point. This one of the things I love about this movie is that it is so small in scale. Like there is no world-ending threat. There's no, giant space portal. There's no huge army battle. Like that was one of the things that kind of disappointed me about Shang-Chi was, it's so good. And then we get this, this army battle at the end that just kind of feels like, okay, we have to do this now. When really I wanted to see more of just the physical confrontation between Shang-Chi and his father. That was what interested me a lot more than the two groups teaming up to fight, these dragon creatures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this one was all just about just basic business bad guy stuff, but still, even that was elevated pretty well.
Right. They did a good job of making it.
They were.
Right. The action was very personal in this, and I loved that aspect of it. And just that final fight between Ant-Man and Yellowjacket was just so well constructed. Like, talk about making good use of the shrinking technology. I thought that was wonderful when they show like, although some of the physics of it's questionable when you see like these guys have the power to they've got the same densities. They've got the power to like punch bullets and all that. But then you see when he's worried about the toy train coming, I thought that was a little bit, I'm like, okay, now you're obviously just playing that for gags.
Yeah.
But I did like some other stuff, like when I like changing the scale of it, where they show it like, it's like the train barreling down and they show it regular size, like, oh, it's just a toy. Or when the tank engine gets thrown and then it ends up growing to become giant size when it smashes through the wall of the house.
Oh, that's one of the things I looked up. That the tank smashing through the building was partially practical.
Oh, really?
They put it was a bunch of blue screen stuff put over like a practical wall and practical like, well, not an entire tank, but over something.
Right.
That
like
so they could get like the dust and just some of the debris and all that.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, so that was really great.
Yeah, I wasn't referring to that tank though. I was talking about the Thomas the Tank Engine. But
okay. I thought you were.
But yeah, I do. That was another.
Yeah.
That was another great use of the shrinking technology, and it's set up so well because we keep seeing his keychain with the tank keychain on it, and then he's just like, when the time comes, he's like, it's not a keychain.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were talking about one than the other, because since you just said tank.
Yeah, sorry. I said I meant to say tank engine.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I like this movie. It's so much fun. I love Luis's explanations in it. And I wish they would get him. I remember they were talking about this in, I think, Infinity War. Like they should get Luis to just recap the entire MCU. And I would love to see them do that at some point.
Yeah, that's God, they can have him go for an hour.
Yeah.
Build it up enough.
And Paul Rudd he's just such a great addition to this group.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens now going forward, because we didn't see Judy Greer at all in, Infinity War or Endgame. So I don't know if she was part of the blip as well, or if they'll try to do with that. But I think that was it's a little bit disappointing that, well, that's something to play with, right? The fact that, Scott basically missed his daughter's childhood. I think that's, being a father myself, I mean, that scene in Endgame is heartbreaking to me when he meets her again and she's a teenager now.
Yeah, and heartbreaking for us because switching actresses. No offense to no offense to the current actress.
But yeah, that's pretty much everything we have to say about Ant-Man, I think. Any final words on it? When he's
Fighting and all that stuff, being Ant-Man, surprising thing I picked up on this time was Rudd isn't much of a wisecracker, which looking at it through all this is actually really interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You'd expect him to be very kind of Spider-Man-esque.
Right, that's a good one. I mean, he's got a lot of great witty lines throughout the rest of the movie, but you're right, he doesn't. When he's in the mode of I think this is another good thing about his character is they show him as being a professional. Like when it's time to do the job, he's all business, he's all professional. And I think that's a subtle aspect of his character that I hadn't really picked up on until you mentioned that. But yeah, that's a really good point, I think.
Yeah. I think that's probably maintained in the next one, but also something I have to double check. But,
right. I have to go back and rewatch it.
Like,
it's been a while since I've seen it.
Yeah, like this movie really is kind of in the details, because like I said, I was a little iffy on it going in just from the basic structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, they show him as very confident, very knowledgeable about what he's doing. Like the scene when he breaks into Hank's place, I thought that was it really showcased how resourceful he is, like being able to pull off the fingerprint, creating the fake handprint and all that kind of stuff. All of that was really well done.
Yeah. Although the handprint thing is now like gonna constantly, because I think Captain Marvel had a handprint, right?
Oh, did they? I didn't remember. It's been a while since I've seen that movie too.
I think so. I've just been kind of background watching a lot of them, and the X-Men movies is just kind of background.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Was that? Oh, also hit the stuff with him in the Regulator, which I thought was really interesting, because that must have kept him from growing, right?
I'm not sure exactly how. I think it's supposed to. Maybe it kept him from growing as well. I know it was supposed to stop him from shrinking down too far. So maybe it also worked in the growing way as well. Because they do say in the next movie that, well, and also in Civil War, right? He says that he had grown giant one size, but it was in a lab and he passed out afterwards. And then they also reference it in Quantumania with Bill Foster, and he talks about using the technology too. So yeah, I do think there was I think that was an aspect of it that they hadn't really known how to do very well in terms of within the world of the story.
Yeah. Because the thing I picked up on is the first button he pushes is nothing happens. So it must have been the growth button. It must have been like the Regulator,
right,
stopping him.
Yeah, and also I liked that's another example of the resourcefulness, right? Figuring out that if you put I'm not sure how well the science actually holds up in it, but putting the growing disc in the belt instead and using that, I thought that another good example of the using Scott's resourcefulness to kind of figure out a way out of things.
Yeah, and Hank didn't have those at the time.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that about does it for our discussion on Ant-Man. Ed, you want to tell people once again where they can find you?
Yeah. So I'm at whywewatch.com. There's a dash between each word. Let's see. I guess for social media, Twitter at whywewatch1. I believe there's no dashes or anything like that in there. And then from the site, I have a bunch of social media links all over the place.
Okay, and we'll have links to all that stuff in the show notes as well. Okay, Ed, thanks so much for coming on. And for those of you who are listening, well, I think by the time this episode comes out, actually, just the way the scheduling has worked out, people who are on the Patreon feed, they'll probably already hear Ed, because we're going to be talking about the Ant-Man comic book for the Patreon exclusive pretty soon. But depending on when you listen to these, if you're part of the Patreon show, that may be out already, or it may not be out. So I'm not quite sure exactly how the schedule is working out. But that does it for this episode of Superhero Cinephiles. Thanks so much for listening. And as always, superherocinephiles.com is the website, Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Facebook. And as I said, if you're a Patreon subscriber, you get these episodes a week early. Plus, you also get access to the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club episodes, where we talk about different comic books and stuff like that. Sometimes with a guest, sometimes just me solo. But thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. If you enjoy the Superhero Cinephiles, then you'll also love my companion podcast, the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. All my Patreon subscribers get access to this exclusive podcast where I review superhero comics and graphic novels. Not sure what comics you want to read next or what you should dive into? I've got you covered on that. I'll be doing reviews, recommendations, and also talking to you about useful entry points if you're interested in reading some comics but don't know where you should start. Plus, you'll get access to all episodes of the main show a week before everyone else. on all of this for as little as just $1 a month. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/supercinemapod, and you can sign up at any subscription amount to get started. Thanks so much for your support, and please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.